Tonight, we continue our pre-election interviews with a candidate for state representative in the 2nd Suffolk District. The district includes all of Charlestown and most of Chelsea. Our guest is a Democratic challenger in the September 1st primary and currently a Chelsea City Councilor, Damali Vidot. Thank you very much for being with us, Damali.
Thank you for having me.
Damali, you've lived, I think, most of your life in Chelsea, and there's quite a trajectory from the high school dropout, getting in a little trouble with the police, becoming a youth worker, I think, and finally a city councilor. I mean, how did you manage that?
I was blessed. I had good system at home. I had a lot of community support. My family just instilled values in me where even though I was going down the wrong path, there was something inside of me that always knew that I knew better than this. So I think that's what it was. And, just being able to really reflect and learn from your experiences and wanting to do better.
Well, one of the things that also happened, speaking of trajectories, is that I guess beginning of this year, maybe you weren't automatically thinking of running for state representative, but then fast forward to April, you're looking at this line of people waiting for food. What clicked in your mind at that point?
Literally, it is this window right outside of my office. There's a park across the street, and the city, we were doing pop-up food pantries. And the food distribution started at 11 in the morning. And I'd look out my window at 7:30, and there were families just starting to line up. And I saw mothers with small children waiting hours to get a box of food to feed their kids. And it lit a fire inside of me. As a mother, I know my blessings, and I'm honored that I'm able to provide for my children and to be able to be a community mom to a lot of folks. But I could not imagine what it must feel like as a mother to not know where your next meal is coming from or how to provide for your children. And so that's when I realized we need to do a little better. We need leadership, because food insecurity isn't new. Housing insecurity isn't new. These issues have long existed in communities like Chelsea. But I think that people are able to kind of turn a blind eye or consider it just another issue that we're dealing with, and not really considering the severity of it, or the fact that there are literally hungry people and homeless people. And as a human, that's something I couldn't ignore.
Well, you had working people living from paycheck to paycheck, suddenly out of work. You had the pandemic, which hit Chelsea really, really hard. What did that tell you about things that need to change?
Everything. And it taught me so much about the fact that it is so expensive to live in the Boston area during these times. It taught me so much about the price of living, the cost of living, about opportunities, about education. It exposed so many vulnerabilities and flaws in our educational system. Environmental, in terms of when you look, COVID doesn't go out looking for communities like Chelsea. It is the underlying health conditions that have long existed because we allow state agencies and federal organizations and big business to pollute our waters and our air and not hold them accountable. So it just exposed all of these things that we've always knew were there, but it just exacerbated to a point where now it's in your face, and what are we going to do about it?
What about schools, about reopening schools?
I listen to the teachers and I listen to the parents, and the fact of the matter is that folks don't feel safe. I don't think that, especially when you think about school districts like in Chelsea or in Charleston that have already been underfunded. Our schools, we're asking teachers to do so much more with so much less. They could barely keep up before. So, I mean, I was one of the first people to come out and say, I don't think that we should reopen the schools. And I really wish that rather than this urgency to return to a normal that no longer exists, we would have spent a little bit more time in perfecting a virtual learning system to make sure that we were kind of bringing our kids along, because we asked teachers from one day to the other to literally, okay, now you're going 100% virtual. And school went from an 8-hour school day in most places to an hour and a half, if even that.
What about housing relief for people? Because you got a lot of renters right now worried about being able to make payments. What about extending the moratorium for them?
I believe that we should be extending the moratorium, but I think more than just extending it for renters, I think we need to look at small property owners as well. I mean, it is I'm a small property owner. I have a 2-family. My tenants have not been able to work since the pandemic. And so it is usually small property owners that are really the mechanism against gentrification. It is usually us that keep the rents lower because we want to preserve that community feel, that we want to make sure that we're preserving the people that contribute to the social fabric of our communities. I saw big banks get bailed out years ago, and I think it's time for banks to bail out people that are literally carrying this country on their shoulders.
I want to ask you about the rest of the districts. We've dwelt so much on Chelsea, but in Charlestown, you have everything from the waterfront to public housing. How do you see yourself addressing the needs of that part of the district?
I believe in intersectionality in everything. I'm always trying to find a way to learn and connect with folks from all walks of life. It is one of my gifts and something that I pride myself on. I see a lot of intersection between Chelsea and Charlestown. We both have some of the highest rates of asthma. We're both dealing with a housing issue. I think the disparities in Charlestown are a little bit more blatant, a little bit more in your face. They're part of Boston, but they're also more resources that Charlestown has access to because they are part of Boston. And so I don't see it as two cities. I see it as one district and a lot of overlap in some of the issues. We both suffer from the opiate crisis. We're both super diverse. And there's a real community feel in these neighborhoods where you don't necessarily see that in other areas of Boston. But there's a real community in Charleston as there is in Chelsea. And so I like to focus on what unites us as opposed to trying to find the differences.
Well, environmental challenges unite both areas. In addition to the air quality issues, you have rising sea levels, which I think are encroaching. But you have this goal that I think you've supported, which is to be totally independent of, at least to end dependency on fossil fuels by 2030. That sounds pretty ambitious. I mean, is that realistic?
I don't know if it's realistic, and maybe it is ambitious, but I think that that's the direction we need to be going towards. We tend to talk about climate change as if it's something of the future. And the fact of the matter is that climate change is here and it's here now. And we see it in areas in the district when there's a storm or a nor'easter where there are parts of the city that flood. In Chelsea, in the industrial zone, there's an area where the island and river floods, and it poses a direct threat to our food supply because the New England Produce Center that is home to fruit and produce and vegetables for the entire Northeast region of this country is at risk. And so this is where climate change intersects with food, intersects with economy, because we're talking about one of the largest employers in Chelsea. So we have to look at the systemic issue. I think that we tend to silo a lot of the issues, but we really need to look at the bigger picture. And so we need to end our dependency on fossil fuel in order to be able to get clean energy to protect our environment from having more impacts in these other areas that we're talking about.
The alternative on the ballot here is an incumbent who has a lot of progressive votes and some progressive allies, including some progressive leanings on police reform. But I think there's one area of difference between the two of you, and that's about legal protection for accountability when it comes to the actions of individual police officers. I'm talking about qualified immunity. You really want to go in that direction. Why?
First of all, I think there's way more differences in our approach in terms of progressive. If we're gonna have to come up with another word to describe me if we're calling his votes progressive. In terms of qualified immunity, I believe in accountability, period. I see, even as city councilors, the things that some folks are able to get away with. I believe there shouldn't be qualified immunity for anyone. I always believe in accountability. Granted, I have to show my face to the electorate, and ultimately that's who my boss is. But I believe that there needs to be accountability. And I think people who are doing the work in good faith also want accountability. I think good cops want to work with other good cops. But if there is a bad apple, then they need to be held accountable. And that's in politics, that's in corporate, that is in any field. I think that we really need to, and when we look at the statistics, the fact of the matter is that there are problems. There are problems here. This is a system that is set up to actually police people and looking for people to break the law. I don't know if we want to give immunity to someone that is walking around with a gun. What are we really saying? And so I don't necessarily subscribe to the whole defund the police movement that we're talking about, but I do want to reimagine public safety. I do want to reimagine it in a way where We have mental health counselors that are police officers, or folks that just give them more tools in their arsenal that's not necessarily designed to kill people, but to actually help people so that we can all just do better as a community.
Well, thank you very much for talking about all of those issues. Damali Vidot, candidate for state representative in the 2nd Suffolk District, which is in Charlestown and most of Chelsea.